A warm welcome to Your Excellency, distinguished speakers and participants. Wesgro has been co-hosting and partnering live events and webinars with the South African Norwegian Association, which is also known as SANA, since February last year, and we have attracted international interest and participants. So to solidify our relations, I'm happy to announce that Wesgro is now an official member of SANA, and therefore a big thank you to SANA CEO, Mr. Sanjay Maharaj, for all the work that we have done together in the past year and for organizing this webinar today. Sanjay is an international commercial lawyer and a businessman from South Africa who is now based in Norway. And today's topic for our webinar is the impact of corruption on foreign direct investment and how development finance institutions can play an important role in tackling corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, my name is Amanda Chaya, and I am the head of the Agribusiness Investment Unit at Wesgro, and I will be co-hosting this webinar today with Professor Mthunzi Mdwaba, who is also our moderator. Professor Mdwaba needs no introduction to many of you. He is the co-founder and board member and chairman of SANA. And he said, if you wanted more information about him, you're welcome to go and search for all of his credentials. Just a bit of house rules. I will be filtering and organizing questions as they come in the moderation, and then moderating the Q&A session. We will ask all attendees not to use the chat functions to ask questions during the webinar, as it is difficult to track the question using this function. If you have a question for our presenters today, please use the Q&A function to pose your question, and our presenters will aim to answer your questions during the presentation or during the Q&A question. With that out of the way, I will now turn over to our moderator, and thank you.
Thank you very much, Amanda. It is an amazing day today because we've got round two. May I call it round two of the conversation? Because the first conversation to the topic today last time was entitled How Foreign Direct Investment and Development Finance Institutions Can Play a Significant Role in Providing Support to the South African private sector during and post-COVID-19 recovery to promote job creation, skills development, and a value-added economy. And during that conversation, this corruption word kept on coming up. It kept Derek very busy, I must tell you, because as the presidential envoy, he's the one who has to make sure that, you know, we have a balanced view of life in South Africa and make sure that people keep coming in and bringing all that money that we desperately need and all those deals and every one of that. So today, I think Sanjay decided, as a South African who's now become Norwegian, that we need to help Derek. And let's rather take this elephant in the room out. So what we're going to do is we're just going to talk about corruption today and its impact and how DFIs can play a role in tackling same. You've heard Amanda say that if you're looking for official stuff about all of us, we are on LinkedIn, some of us are on Twitter, we're on Instagram, you'll find us. I want to welcome Wesgro as a member, have been our partner since the beginning. I welcome them as our partners now. They are a fully paid member. We love to say that, fully paid member. They've also been, of course, joined by Akivet, which is a peace and human rights center based in Norway. They also joined by Shared Value Solutions. So we have these brand new members that have joined us. But I think as part of the announcements, before I hand over to our illustrious panel, I need to mention that amongst us, I will talk as well about NABA when we get to it. But NABA, which is the Norwegian African Business Association, has an MOU with SANA. So we are sisters or brothers, or we don't even have a gender. It's up to you. You can call us whatever, but we are very tight, the two organizations. And as of this year, Her Excellency Ambassador Dr. Hella, who's with us and is about to kick off, and the Norwegian Embassy Secretary, Martin Understad, have included SANA under Team Norway, which is made up of the Royal Norwegian Embassy, NABA that I've just mentioned, Innovation Norway, and so SANA now is in this illustrious group. So again, colleagues, good morning. Now we are going to go straight to the matter. I need to indicate immediately that Dr. Hella, the ambassador, needs to be out of here by 11:45 South African time, which would be 10:45 her time in Norway. So we're going to find a creative, innovative way of making sure that she's going to speak and everybody's going to keep time. Remember, keeping time is absolutely important for us to be a productive and competitive group of colleagues and our countries as well. So at the end of it, when we go into the moderation, I ask you that in your Q&A, you pose as many questions as you think you need for Ambassador Hella's attention, so that we make her very busy before she leaves. Everybody will be on standby and I will try and save all the other people because she needs to be our shining star before she leaves at 11:45. So without further ado, colleagues, our first speaker is Her Excellency, Ms. Astrid Emil Hella, Norwegian ambassador. We shouldn't tell you that because she's really been supporting us. She's in all our conversations, but she's ambassador to South Africa, Botswana, Lesotho, Namibia, Zimbabwe, Madagascar, as well as SADC. I will introduce the other speakers as they come on. Over to you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Professor, and I'm humbled by this introduction. It's really very difficult to speak after such a fantastic presentation, but thank you so much for having me, and thank you also very much to SANA and all good colleagues, and I'm very, very pleased to have Minister Hanekom also with us as special envoy for investment to South Africa today, and yesterday Minister of Tourism, one of the really great growth sectors for South Africa, I'm sure also in the future. I'm very glad also that we are able to keep on this dialogue on difficult issues, because it's important if we really want to make progress in our bilateral relation, and if we want to really enhance investment and trade, then we need to be honest to say exactly where are the difficulties, and we also need to be frank, and therefore I'm very glad that we had this frank debate last time, and that we are able to dig a bit deeper today. So we will have Eivind Fjellstad as head of NABA speaking on more specifics for Norwegian companies, but I would just like to say some general words. Of course, the first and foremost, as we see it, of course, corruption is a distortion for competition and for trade. It reduces investments, it slows developments, it widens economic and social inequalities, and it feeds injustice, discontent, exclusion, and polarization. So it has a huge number of negative effects, in addition to being, of course, an important crime, and very often organized crime also. It also erodes trust in institutions and in government processes. And we have seen now also with the COVID crisis, how different the handling can be in societies where there is trust and not, because when we need to trust individuals in the societies, then the trust in government is also extremely important. And also the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development was very clear that corruption in all its forms is a threat to the development in the world. So as Norway, of course, there is a zero tolerance for corruption, and that is also that is the case, of course, for use of all official development funds, and also for the partners that we do have as Norfund, the Norwegian Investment Fund for Developing Countries. That goes, of course, in their management for themselves, but also with the partners with which they work. Then we have also, of course, the Norwegian government not only looks at the Norwegian funded activities, but also what the Norwegian companies are doing also abroad. So this is a huge importance for Norway, being one of the most open economies in the world. We import very much of what we consume, and we export almost everything we produce. So it means that for us, competition, a world where competition is fought, is a competitive challenge for us. So we need our companies, of course, to abide by the standards like the UN guiding principles on business and human rights. And I'm glad that South Africa and Norway were very close partners in the Human Rights Council to put these principles, as well as the OECD guidelines, where South Africa is always a very active partner also, as is Norway in OECD. So sorry. As ambassador, I'm very often impressed on how Norwegian businesses are operating abroad. And I can tell you it's very important, of course, for the businesses owners, but also for the public in Norway. And it is therefore a reputational challenge for companies to engage with partner companies that have a corruption risk also. I would like to mention one aspect which is very relevant to South Africa. It is, of course, the investments of the Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund. As I mentioned before, it's a little part of that fund invested in Africa, but of that part, 85% is invested in South Africa, despite South Africa being only a country of 60 million in a continent of 1.2 billion. So in the investments made by the sovereign fund in companies on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange and in companies in South Africa, there is, of course, an anti-corruption focus also on this. And I can just mention the three aspects that are highlighted by the fund in its investments in companies. These are general criteria, so be there in South Africa or elsewhere. So it is the establishments first of a clear policy of anti-corruption in every board of every company. What is the policy of that company on anti-corruption? And how also is the anti-corruption strategy integrated into all business operations? That is the second aspect. And the third is to report and engage on anti-corruption programs. So there also, as an active investor, Norwegian Sovereign Wealth Fund is engaged in following up on these three areas in companies that they will invest in. Very often investing small parts in many companies, that is the strategy of the fund, not being a big owner in few, but to be a very active owner. That's the case now in about, I think, 90 companies on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. So thank you very much. I would just conclude by saying that we are very encouraged by the efforts undertaken by President Ramaphosa and by the South African governments. We are aware of the huge challenges. And I think he was really, as I witnessed his first State of the Nation and the election campaign, the fight against corruption was really one of the main issues that were on the agenda. And I think that will be measured. And I see there are three aspects here. One is a policy aspect, which the South African government is taking up loud and clear. So I think it's not put on the carpet at all. It's really raised as a challenge in South Africa. And now today, even in the COVID recovery packages and even in the procurements of protective equipment and everything, it is there, but it is addressed and it is also accepted as a challenge. The other is the building of institutions and the strengthening of the anti-corruption institutions in South Africa, which is very important. And there are, I think, also very commendable developments have been taken place. And the third aspect, which I think has been striking, seeing South Africa as a foreigner, it has been the level of impunity in South Africa, and almost total impunity for enormous looting of the public resources and of the company's resources. And that now being addressed, I think this will be very important to follow also in the year ahead. And this also there, I will say we are more in the start, but having the policy and having the institutions, I'm confident that South Africa will now address the third level, which is to fight impunity against corruption, and then also to have, of course, more preventive measures. Thank you very much, Professor, and I'll give you the floor back.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency. Of course, I let you speak longer because you're going to leave early. So no one else should speak as long as Her Excellency. Everybody else speaks for 5 minutes because I still need Her Excellency to participate in the moderation before she leaves. You've said a mouthful, and I'm not going to come back to it right away so that we can get the movement that we need. But there is something you mentioned when you were talking about South Africa and Norway being on the Human Rights Council. I have to mention that yesterday I was moderating a different webinar wearing a different hat. In that capacity, I am the chairman of the Human Rights and Responsible Business Policy Working Group of all employers in the world. And it was for the celebration of the United Nations Guiding Principles Plus 10. This is the 10th year of that celebration. So later I'll bring that into play, the UNGPs and the human rights and corruption and all of that and the SDGs and connect all of that. So now we move on to Derek. Derek is former Minister of Tourism, Derek Hanekom, and he is currently the South African Presidential Investment Envoy, and he's the chair of the Ahmed Kathrada Foundation. Derek, over to you. We need to unmute you. We need to unmute you, Derek.
Got it. Thank you. Yeah. And thanks so much from a beautifully warm Cape Town, clear blue sky. I'm going to stick to my 5 minutes. I have my stopwatch on, so you can't cheat me at all, Mthunzi. It's inevitable that there'll be some overlap in what we say, that we'll say some of the same things, maybe in different ways. Mthunzi, I'm not an expert on the subject matter, but so I'll be sharing thoughts. I don't have a written input, if you like. But I'll start off with the impact of corruption on economies before I get on to the impact of corruption on direct foreign investment. I mean, in general, there's loads of literature on it. I'm just going to read you a short comment made by the World Bank. And it says, corruption is one of the greatest obstructions to economic and social development. It undermines development by distorting the rule of law and weakening the institutional foundation on which economic growth depends. So, I mean, the impact on the economy and the global economy, it's estimated to be anything like up to $1 trillion a year, which is enormous. The impact on the South African economy over the last 7 years, it was estimated by one researcher, was anything that, and that is on revenue collected by our South African Revenue Service, was anything between 500 billion rand and R1 trillion, which for South Africa is an enormous amount of money. That's over the 7 worst years, if you like. Clearly, we're in the process, as the ambassador said, of trying to fix it, but the impact still rolls on, and the process of fixing is not a quick one. So the impact, I should say, firstly, of course, one of the most important components of it is the deepening of inequality. The people who tend to benefit from corruption are those that already have, those that are able to exert their political influence, and the poor and the vulnerable become the most impacted on, if you like. And often it's the poor that are unable, even on small matters like bribes, are just unable to negotiate their way out of it because they're vulnerable. Secondly, it creates huge inefficiencies in the economy because the bribe gets the wrong people the contract, gets the wrong people the tender. And so you have, apart from the injustice of it, you have necessarily an inefficiency that results from it. And thirdly, it has potentially and often does have very serious negative environmental impact, because through buying contracts, paying for contracts, often EIAs are bypassed. Often we see the plundering of natural resources, whether it's in forestry or in marine resources, fisheries, etc. And fourthly, it creates in the economy disincentives to pay taxes, which further reduces the revenue, etc. So, and of course, importantly, and linked to the inequality equation, is that it creates political instability. And therefore, the conditions for foreign direct investment are very seriously impacted by corruption. So on FDI, I needn't say it, because it's almost self-evident that investors will be very reluctant, and our research shows are reluctant to invest their money in countries that are inherently corrupt or where corruption levels are high, because there's a cost to doing business. And of course, there's a future cost, which is not that easily determined, to doing business. So there's uncertainty, if you like. I'm so close to the end of my 5 minutes, it's scary. What we want, of course, is foreign direct investment. It's a good thing if those who choose to invest, I heard what the ambassador said about Norwegian businesses, if there's a kind of an ethos amongst foreign investors, because I think the unwillingness of investors to invest in countries that are corrupt puts further pressure on those governments to address corruption in their countries. On the role of development finance institutions, well, crisply, I mean, firstly, they should have their own code of conduct, and they should address issues of corruption within their own institutions in the first place. So, we have to work on the assumption and in the hope that DFIs, the large global DFIs and domestic DFIs, are themselves corruption-free and have zero tolerance towards corruption. And then secondly, it's the kind of rules that govern where they invest, how they invest, the impact of investment, and where they should not invest. So if DFIs are, and clearly, especially developing countries, do to a large extent depend on sorry, DFI, I'm talking about, back to foreign direct investment. Developing countries depend largely on foreign direct investment, but also largely are dependent on the contributions and the roles of DFIs. If DFIs, in the same way as all investors, say we will apply due diligence to every project that we choose to invest in or that we're requested to invest in, but that due diligence will be more than just whether we, in our quest to be sustainable, whether there'll be some return on the investment, albeit a non-commercial return, but that we will apply rigorous ethics, and we will not invest in or make our lending facilities or take equity in any project where there's corruption associated with that project. And we'll have to not only looking at the impact of the project on society, but looking at the ethics surrounding the project. So I think the DFIs, in applying these stringent criteria and stringent rules, can be an important pressure point on governments to do something about corruption. My 5 minutes are well up, so I'm going to stop there. Thanks.
Thank you, Derek. You did well. Much better than last time, I can tell you. You only exceeded by a minute this time. So we're getting better. We've got to recognize progress and improvement all the time. So thank you. Thank you so much. We'll come back and you'll have more time during the moderation to say a little bit more. You'll have also, because the ambassador will be gone, so we'll have more time as well to play with. The next colleague now to speak to us is the CEO of Arise Invest, who's again been very supportive, has participated before last year as well. Mr. Deepak Malik, over to you, sir. As soon as you're unmuted, sir, I think you also need to unmute. Deepak, if you can unmute.
Sorry about that. It's technology. Okay. Good morning, everyone. Like I said, my name is Deepak Malik. I'll be quick. This 5 minute stop clock is a little bit like a sword on my head, but anyway. And I'm the chief executive of a company called Arise, Arise BV. It's a joint venture between, effectively between Norway and Netherlands. We are 48% Norwegian owned, which is very relevant for this webinar. And we are 52% Dutch owned. I've spent 13 years of my life prior to that working for Norfund. I set up Norfund's offices in South Africa, and that's when we did our first investment. And today, Norfund is one of the largest development financial institutions in the continent, very strong on renewable energy and in the financial sector and agriculture. So we created a new company, Arise, and we are today the largest single minority investor in the financial sector in sub-Saharan Africa. We have assets just short of $1 billion. So I've had exposure for over 30 odd years right across the continent. So this subject is pretty dear to me, and I know I'm not going to repeat what Minister Honeycomb said because he covered a lot of the issues really, really well. I mean, there is a direct correlation between GDP and corruption, but there's a very important element of corruption which I want to focus on, which is perceived corruption, right? And perceived corruption gets most of the negativity in this world, right? And once you build up a name that you're a corrupt nation, like we have in South Africa, and you know, as Minister Honeycomb said, we've lost nearly, you know, a trillion rand due to what has happened. It's very difficult to change that perception in the world, right? And that's what the key issue is. And I know that the current president is really trying, you know, to change that perception. But it takes two hands to corrupt. It takes it's the corrupter and the corrupted. Unfortunately, the corruptors get away scot-free most of the time, right? And some of them are European companies. Let's be honest about it. You know, some of them are international companies. We've had the McKinseys and the SAPs and the Guptas, etc. I don't see much prosecution happening in any of those people, but we hound our own people here, right? You know, who've got corrupted. So I think that's an important element always to keep in mind, that how do you tackle the perception of corruption? I think it affects the vulnerable people the most, as was said earlier, and it affects the growth rate of our country here tremendously. And also with COVID, with the added impact of COVID, the situation has got further aggravated on this particular fund. But the strange statistic which I wanted to share with you is that the USA is the most sensitive to corruption in the world. It withdraws FDIs quicker than any other bloc of countries. Unfortunately, Europe is not that quick on tackling corruption in developing countries as compared to the US. I think Asia is the worst out of the lot, right, at the end of the day. They kind of ignore a lot of corruption issues. I'm not saying that the Chinese or the Indians look the other way, but they are less prone to speaking out, in my opinion, as compared to the United States. I will also quickly switch to the role of DFIs. I work for a DFI. I continuously deal with the DFI as a major shareholder. All I can say is that I can talk about my experience with Norfund, which is the Norwegian DFI. To be honest, I think they're one of the few DFIs which actually walk the talk, right? You know, they're very strong in terms of their own internal governance. They're also very strong in terms of how they tackle corruption. But the problem is that their levels of tackling are restricted to their projects, right? They're not involved in the overall country corruption. They are indirectly through the shareholder, unless the shareholder tells them stop investing in a particular country because it's not tackled corruption. But DFIs have strong internal processes and governance processes to tackle it. They could still do a lot more, in my opinion. I have obviously exposure to most of the DFIs who operate in South Africa and the rest of sub-Saharan Africa. Not many people follow, and I'm proud of it, really. Not many people follow this to the letter as Norfund does, right? At the end of the day. They would exit an investment at a loss if they find corruption is blatant. And I wish lots of other DFIs would follow that same principle, right? They get very isolated, they're very inward looking, they don't want to look at what's happening in the neighbors as long as it's not affecting them. But I think we can all contribute by looking at our neighbors and what our neighbors are doing, rather than just looking at our own house all the time, that is that in order. So for me, a lot more can be done by DFIs generally, and I really hope that this scourge is tackled aggressively by a president in South Africa, and also change perceptions. I'll just give you an example of perceptions to close. Not many people would know that Nigeria attracted more foreign direct investment than South Africa did, in spite of the fact that Nigeria is more corrupt in terms of a country than South Africa is. So what is the problem with South Africa? I think it's also largely the perceptions in the market, the perceptions of large-scale sort of issues. The PPE scandals don't help, right? You know, the McKinsey scandals don't help, the Gupta scandals don't help. Such scandals are never advertised in Nigeria, right? They have more corruption on their oil wells, etc., than we could ever dream of, right? But they've had more foreign direct investment than South Africa has. So I really think, the government, I'm just an investment person, I'm small as compared to the diplomats and the politicians, but it's really, really important to change perceptions by genuine action. Prof, I will end there because I think I've exceeded my 5 minutes, but I could spend a lot of time giving you practical issues and how they've been dealt with in the continent and in South Africa, but I'll close there for the moment.
Thank you, Deepak. You killed my time. You killed my time. You were worse off than last time. But you know what? You know, we'll see in the moderation how we bring you back. So now we move over to Ivan. I'm cognizant that now we are 9 minutes away before the Excellency leaves us. I'm wondering, Ivan, if you and Mpume would mind, although I'm going to do it anyway, but I'm just being nice, I suppose I have to be, that I get the ambassador now to come in and respond to some of the things that have been said. I'm looking on the Q&A. I don't see any questions. I've also checked on the chat section. Amanda, am I right? There's really nothing that's been said or asked of the ambassador. So this is purely just to make sure that the ambassador at least can comment on what has been said so far, knowing that, of course, when Ivan comes, he's going to add more Norwegian elements in it, as the ambassador had already said, and give more detail on the Norway relationships with Africa, South Africa, and so on. So, Ambassador, I'm giving you a little bit more time for fame, if you'd like to have it.
Thank you. I love it. That's that's a beautiful part of diplomacy. It's the fame. It's why we are here. No, I'm just joking. I'm sorry, I have to attend another meeting, but I will leave as a hostage Martin Andestad, who is now participating as my ghost. So if there are any difficult questions to Norway, please forward them to him. And there also, I think we are all, I think it's very important what was said about the perception and the policies. It's without any doubt, the issue of corruption is one of the first things that investors or companies ask when we talk about business in South Africa. They talk about corruption and they talk about crime. Then we have to address it. We cannot pretend it doesn't matter or it doesn't exist, but then also to expose the whole of the picture. Which is to say, okay, what is being done to address it, and how is it possible to work in this environment and still make profit? So I think it's a balance act, but it's not something that can be put on the carpet. We have to address it and be open to it, but maybe also to make more evident the assets of South Africa, because one thing is fight against corruption, but some aspects of South Africa are very much linked to the possibility to fight corruption. This is a constitution which is democratic and has high standards for human rights and the rule of law. That is essential for a company. Many companies will look at one thing: how are the court system? If I'm taking to court, how is it functioning? Are they independent or are they politically manipulated? Another aspect of South Africa, extremely important also in the fight against corruption, it is the possibility to have a free press, freedom of expression, free media, freedom of speech. So these are, I think, in fairness for South Africa, when we talk about corruption here, corruption is given visibility. Also, you have Chapter 9 institutions like the Auditor General. Every year, all the reports and all the findings are made public and are made also exposed in the parliament. So there, I think, also to make this image of South Africa and corruption fair, we must say to the companies, yes, it exists, but we also need to show the whole picture, which is also very important for Norwegian investors. It does make a matter to invest in a country with human rights, democracy, and rule of law, where journalists are not killed because they expose corruption, where you can have trade unions that are not tortured, that you have all these assets. As a Norwegian ambassador and as Norwegian companies, I can say these are maybe understated assets for South Africa. Because there also South Africa is in a region and on a continent where that is not the general impression. So maybe I think South Africa has to underline this aspect even more towards investors in its policy to attract investments. Thank you very much.
Ambassador, I thank you for that, Ambassador. And I think I'm going to use that opportunity to ask you more questions. Of course, my other colleagues will also be thinking about these, but I want to take the opportunity when you talk about understated assets. You know, I like that construction, understated assets, because you've gone and you've talked about the legal framework, you've talked about the courts, you've talked about freedom of speech, you've talked about free media, you've talked about trade unions not being tortured. This is very important. People don't understand this. For me, as an ILO person, you know, social dialogue is not enough on its own, but you must also have freedom, the freedom to express yourself, the freedom to do things, Convention 87 in the ILO. Now, I'm wondering, before you leave, do you think perhaps, and I mean, of course, we are one of the most beautiful countries in the world. I mean, I mustn't forget that, you know. Some of us are fortunate to travel all over the world, you know, many countries a year. I still haven't found a country like South Africa. I'm biased, of course, but it's one of the most beautiful countries in the world. Now, I want to find out, Ambassador, don't you think that perhaps this transparency, which is important, tends to also work against us? So on the one hand, you've got transparency. And because we are so transparent, everything is reported, everything is headlines, you know, and also the focus on South Africa historically, pre-Mandela, Mandela, Mbeki, Zuma's time, the fact that, you know, we are the miracle nation. We've always been on the headlines, we're on the microscope, we've always been watched. That second element. The third element for me is that, you know, South Africa, because we are such an interesting destination, we tend to also, as a people, we are known for our friendliness, for our warmth. But we are also not so known as being, for instance, the Rugby World Cup champions. And I say this deliberately because when Australia and New Zealand are the champs, everybody knows, every day they shout about this. There's this element of modesty and humility where we also understate the things we do because we take it, you know, we mustn't be seen to be bragging. Would you like to comment on these before you leave, Ambassador? Then I'll get the other colleagues to comment later.
Thank you very much, Professor. I would say first, is it dangerous to be open? No, it is not. You must be open. But of course, there are consequences. For example, if you look at Statistics South Africa, you can be proud that you have a statistic authority. You know how many are killed, you know why they're killed and how they're killed. You know how many women are being killed. You know how many children are being abused. You know about the corruption. Most countries don't know that. So South Africa also, today you have a high number of people with COVID because you trace them. Other countries don't trace them. So if you have a culture of statistics and of knowledge, that is extremely important. If you don't have that, you cannot do anything. You can invest in totally wrong areas. As it was said for violence against women, you can put 100 policemen in the street, but if you know that the women are killed by their husbands, you have to put the policeman in a bed. So it doesn't help if you don't have knowledge. You need statistics and you need knowledge. And every time you look at issues like that, we used to say women in Norway are not being abused until we started to talk about it and count them. And every day we counted, it was the number increasing. The corruption is the same. If you talk about it, it increases, but then you can address it. In South Africa's public branding and diplomacy, you come from a very positive, if I can say, you know, the Mandela background, which is an asset for you. There is a sympathy for South Africa in many countries in the world. I do see a difficulty for South Africa in the continent. That is a bit, if I can compare, it's like Germany in Europe or with United States in the world. Because you are a kind of superpower, both in economic terms and when it comes to foreign policy and resources and use of that resources. So other countries are expecting a lot for you. But if you raise your voice and make yourself visible, then they say, hey, calm down, don't be patronizing, you know? So it's a very difficult balance, I think, but to make known the assets, don't pretend to be something you're not, but make known better the assets of South Africa. And the assets of South Africa, it's your constitution, it's the high standards of your democracy, rule of law, and human rights. In addition to the, of course, the assets of the service sector, and the fact that you have companies listed on the stock exchange where you can invest in. Today, investors don't go around and buy a factory. Also, private investors, as you know, private people and investment funds today, they buy shares in companies, and you have a stock exchange that people can invest in. And I'm without any doubt that in the African free trade area, South Africa will, be it in 5, 10 or 15 years, be the country that will benefit the most from that free trade area, because you're producing things that people are buying. You're far beyond most of the countries, but you must not take it for granted. Because now people in African countries and other African countries are progressing a lot to address investments. So I think you have countries like Kenya, you mentioned Nigeria, Ghana, and others. They are doing a lot. So I think they're also the president's ambition to be on the ease of doing business index. I think he wanted to be number 50. These kinds of progresses, you need to run much faster today than you did yesterday, because today all others are running too. And they are running much faster than they did today. And when you are compared today, you're compared with other countries opening up extremely fast. Thank you.
Ambassador, I'm interrupting you and chasing you away because Martin is going to be upset with me next time, and then we don't get the benefit of you participating. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it, but you must go now. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. Goodbye. We now go over to Ivan. Ivan, sorry to keep you waiting, but I'm sure you will understand and indulge me. We now move over to you. As I said, Ivan is the CEO of NABA, the Norwegian African Business Association, with whom as SANA, the South African Norwegian Association, we have a memorandum of understanding. We work well together. Parts of our organization are both based in Norway. So Ivan, over to you.
Thank you, Mr. Executive Chairman Tunsi. Thank you for the kind invitation to join this very important discussion, very important topic. First of all, let me start with the positive news. Corruption is not a challenge often reported by our members. And I would echo something that Deepak also hinted to, this misconception about corruption. This is something we often meet when we're discussing with investors and companies that have never set foot in any African market. I must also say, I mean, our fellow friend, Msebesi Jonas, your colleague, Minister Hanekom, who made this excellent, exciting book about the Gupta scandal. This is very disconnected from our experience. We have some of our largest members are based in South Africa. They have never reported anything like this. They are having huge contracts with the government in the fields of energy and other areas. So that is a good thing. I remember discussing this topic with one of our members a while back, and he told me that, remember, corruption, or as it was called, facilitation fees, we used to be able to deduct this on our corporate tax. And then suddenly from one day to the next, completely illegal. So I mean, that was kind of from day to night, how that happened. And it is exactly this point, the law that is now making all our members having this zero tolerance to corruption. Because as one member said, if you first start involving in these kinds of conducts, it's like it's written on your forehead that I'm open to corruption. It will always haunt you. We have Norwegian companies that have had major issues. I remember one case in East Africa some years ago. This company, they were prohibited from entering any World Bank contract for several years. So there's such big stakes if you go down this lane. So we fortunately have a good track record. Also, there are obviously minor cases, I have to say. I mean, this is companies that have had people in one of your neighboring countries have had people being arrested due to some immigration issues, where companies have basically thought that, okay, this is a security matter. We need to get our employees out of that prison, and that needs to happen now. So that are some of the cases that we do have heard about, but it's not often. Since the development finance institutions are a topic of today, I think from our experience working with our founding member, Norfund, they are de-risking. This is also something that Deepak mentioned, but I think for any Norwegian company or investor co-financing, co-funding a project with Norfund, that is basically almost like a guarantee for not getting involved in anything, because they have such high standards when it comes to ESG. This is, they are government owned. They will not ever go into any fishy business. And I'm just thinking about like one of our largest pension funds, KLP. They reported due to their co-investments with Norfund, they were having like 10-11% return on investment last year. I wonder, they would never have done any investments in Africa, probably, if they were not able to co-invest with Norfund, because probably the risks, the perceived risks would have been too large. So I think we can be very grateful for the role that DFIs like Norfund are playing. That's my time is up, but I look very forward to the discussion afterwards. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Ivan. I think that you are proving what Shakespeare used to say, brevity is the soul of wit. So you were like right to the point, and we will give you more time to come back and elaborate a little bit more during the moderated discussion. We now go to Mpume Zwane. Ms. Mpume Zwane is the Divisional Finance Director at Unilever, expert advisor to the board of SANA, and is the chairperson at the Durban Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And Mpume is also becoming a regular now. So over to you, Mpume.
Thank you. Greetings to all. I hope you can hear me well. So I'm South African first and foremost. I must just mention that. And I love this country. And this country has amazing potential, has so much to offer. Now, when we come to the corruption aspect of things, I think for me, it comes in different forms. I am in business mostly, so I will tend to talk a lot about how that part is impacted. Before I start, let me just give some stats. Our imports in 2019, so 2 years ago, we were sitting at $103 billion. Exports, $104 billion. So as a nation, we are with our rand that is also not matched to the euro or the dollar in terms of equality. We're much more lower. We are well positioned to be a country of choice when it comes to really manufacturing, so we can boost our exports. And secondly, our labor cost. Yes, compared to China may be a bit higher. We're less subsidized as a country, but we have a potential to do a bit more in that space. So for me, where do I see the role of FDIs? I work for one. Unilever is a FDI. It boasts a lot in how we invest in localization of production and sourcing locally as well. It is critical. There are many other companies which are similar to this, which very much may say corruption will be an impact in a way to us. In my experience, as a big conglomerate, the level of corruption that we're impacted by is not all levels. The level that we have as a country, firstly, is to look at politics. We are highly politicized as a country. Politicization of a country is a key factor in corruption and how we're operating and servicing investments in the country. So for me, how do we look at perhaps implementing the beautiful laws we have designed by wonderful scholars in South Africa and Africa as a whole? In that space, we're not able to facilitate, execute, and implement these wonderful laws that will tend to hinder corruption if it does come about. The second part is, how do we also allow business to be more freer in being independent in how they're operating? Why am I saying this? We have many policies that have been designed, beautiful on paper. When we're trying to go around those policies as a business, those policies result into corruption or activities of corruption being conducted by the officials in the value chain. I'll give an example. The biggest port in Africa is in Durban. The biggest port that sits there, it is mandated to empower the economy. At this point in time, we're finding ourselves with huge bottlenecks in the port. And if you look at what is really behind that, because of us being the gateway into Africa, we are being used by some people who tend to wanna access Africa as a whole. So we then find things like counterfeit products that are coming in that must be regulated, because those impact. For my company in particular, we manufacture goods locally to export and to also into bigger Africa. When those counterfeit goods impact our production levels, our sales as a company directly, as a company, we start exploring how do we then minimize this impact. We start manufacture in different countries beyond South Africa. So for me is, how do we minimize the impacts of this level of corruption? Then to move on to the other part of the market itself. Production levels are not where they're supposed to be in South Africa. How do we incentivize foreign companies to come in and invest in the farming activities? To give an example, we are able to produce, due to our climate, products that can be sourced and be serviced and exported to many different countries, but somehow we are not able to attract investors who are willing to educate, empower local resources to then supply them directly. And we have same situation in Unilever as well. So how do we try and really take the corruption heads and say, yes, it does exist, is how business has been working for many, many years. How do we then execute the laws we have to ensure we enforce and punish those who are in corruption, which mostly are the middle activities or the lower part of the administration in the government, and get those removed, or even not removed, probably more so minimized in impact. Because that's the piece for me, I sit and think to myself, if we're able to minimize the impact of the processes that we have in government to be less impacted by the corrupt behaviors from officials, it can be done. But overall, as a nation, we can produce more. and we can partner with foreign countries to supply them raw materials. But our biggest issue is we can't implement beautiful laws we have properly to then navigate and regulate ourselves enough to be attractive to the funders. No fund, for example, being mentioned earlier on, funded with trust. And then lastly, how to also then improve our image as a country, say, as an image of a country, we are corrupt, yes, you know that, but we are doing 1, 2, 3 about it as we try to improve this. For me, it's a matter of what we do from now moving forward, as we know what we know right now, without having to lose the little we've got in the economy currently. We need to improve the economy. For us to do that, we have to look at ourselves and try and clean up. But there is potential. It can be done differently. I'll stop them, Tunzi, and then come in with the more fair question answers part, because of course some ones, a few to ask in specifically around the part of execution of the policies, so we can unpack that further in the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mpume. I think that because you are the lady of the house now that the ambassador is gone, you will have more privileges, you know, so don't worry, you'll have more time than these gentlemen here. So, but what we need to do now is to go back to where I started with the ambassador as she was leaving. I really would like to hear some comment from all the participants and the panelists on the thoughts that I shared with the ambassador, and I'm happy to repeat them. The ambassador talked about understated assets, said South Africa has understated assets, and the understated assets, she rattled a list of the understated assets from our legal framework and the courts to the kind of investment hub that we are, to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, which she says is very well run. She'd mentioned before that 85% of the funds of the sovereign fund that is destined for Africa is spent in South Africa, in South African companies. She mentioned the free media. She mentioned the freedom of expression. She mentioned that trade unions are not tortured. She mentioned that South Africa is a lovely country, in which she also mentioned the president is doing his best at the moment to have an improved situation. So now I want to also have a solution orientedness, okay? So we've dealt with corruption. We know it exists. We know that our transparency also tends to lift it a little bit higher. And it also tends to give a little bit more towards the perception that we have, which we also say is a problem. But at the same time, we say it's good to be transparent, even if there's a higher perception. So I'd like some comment on how then, given these understated assets, how can South Africa do better? How can Africa do better? We don't have to limit it to South Africa, by the way, because the ambassador also mentioned that South Africa also has a statistics authority. She then said, most countries don't know the things that South Africa knows and the things that it exposes and the things that therefore people know happening in South Africa. Somebody then said, there are other countries that they believe have far more corruption than South Africa, but attract a lot of investments than South Africa. So this is a conundrum. It's a conundrum we need to unpack. How do we unpack this? So whoever is moved, please, you can start. I've seen there's a question already from Anisha Maharaj Esak that Deepak has responded to. And I think Deepak has encouraged Anisha to give a little bit more elaboration so that he can come back again. So I encourage everybody to also use the question and answers to please pose the questions to our panelists. So whoever is moved can start. Who wants to go first? So I saw an unmuting by everybody at the same time.
First, Mtunzi.
Okay, Mpume, you go.
Okay, Mtunzi, let me go first. Okay, this is the one I would like to really probably speak more on. As a Deepening Chamber board member, the one thing I've observed as a gap that we have as South Africa is the branding of the country is very, very weak. That has been mentioned by the ambassador already, but as a business community, we have a role to play in that. There are many different chambers that exist in the world that we have partnered with as South Africa in different provinces in the country. Those chambers, we hear only as our business members in our own home countries. All they hear is in the news is the negative things. So as business people, how do we start using the channels we've got to communicate positively about the country? Because yes, there's corruption, but there's good things happening as well. A good step is, let's use the chamber platforms. Every country, every city has a chamber linked to it. how do we start communicating at that level? Sana could be even a good platform to enable that. We communicate, the rebrand it positively. That's the first part. The second part is education. We have a strong education, PhD levels in the country, in education systems or network globally. How do we use those channels? Because we have researchers who do wonderful things. And we had that in COVID stats, one of the best countries in tracking the COVID numbers. We have the scholar levels in this country are huge. How do we use that platform to communicate the positive brand of the country? That's my first take. I will stop there for now and continue later.
Thank you, Mpume. I think that is a very good contribution. We are not branded well. Branding is weak. And I think when others come in, maybe they should also cover, especially the ones who are South Africans, as to then what is Brand South Africa doing? What is Proudly South African doing? So, you know, these are the people who are supposed to do the stuff for us. So if they are not doing what they're supposed to be doing, so what should we be doing? And also, please feel free to add other elements. Who wants to go after Mpume? Derek, Deepak, Ivan, who wants to go? Ivan, okay, Ivan, you can go.
I just wanted to chip in here that, I mean, investors will shy away if they feel that the marketplace is uneven. But I mean, as I also mentioned in the introduction, you know, this Gupta scandal, I mean, there is a disconnect, because how would otherwise some of our largest members still have made huge investments in South Africa if they thought that, you know, this is how South Africa is? So there's I don't know if I totally agree with that branding issue. And I just want to also say that what we do on our side, because we have from time to time anti-corruption trainings. We have members such as K2 Integrity, KPMG, who can help our other members to kind of scrutinize potential partners and so on. So I think it's important also to discuss what we as a business community can do on our side as well. So just a quick input from my side.
If I can interrupt you, that's fine. And I hear you on what the business community can do. So you say you don't necessarily agree with the branding. Let's park that for now. But how do you, though, respond to the element that the ambassador mentioned, that South Africa fails to raise its understated assets, which in some respect, she's agreeing with Mpume, because she's not calling it a branding situation. She's calling it an understating, almost like a modesty issue where we don't know how to shout and scream to the heavens for people to know the things we do. Because yes, we have investments by some companies. Yes, they are enjoying South Africa. Yes, they are dealing with corruption. But I think what I hear Mpume saying is that we can do a lot more. What I heard the ambassador saying is that South Africa, yes, you're dealing with the corruption. In fact, you may not be unique. You might not even be more corrupt than other people. It's just that you make a lot of noise about it. You've got statistics to report. You've got the media to report. You've got everybody's watching you. You're a democracy kind of beacon in the world. So how do we do that? Because I'm looking for how do we do better? Because we want to do better with NABA. We want to partner more with NABA. We want to partner more with SANA. We want to do more business. So how do we do that in your view?
Well, I believe in the power of examples. I think let's make sure that the rest of the Norwegian business community know that Scatec's amazing journey started in South Africa. They built their first 75 megawatt solar park, and look at how they have become a global company. It all started in South Africa. There's a reason why the control center is still in Cape Town, you know, looking at all of their operations in the Middle East and in Europe. So I think let's make sure that those great business examples are being properly communicated, because business people will believe in business people. And I think this is what the investment envoys like Minister Honeycomb have also done a great job in with this big investment conference as well. As one example, you know, showcasing great examples. That would be my first kind of go-to. Otherwise, I also echo what the ambassador said. Many good points. So
thank you, Ivan. I see Deepak's hand is up. Okay, so I'll go to Deepak, then I'll go to Derek after Deepak. Deepak, over to you.
Yeah, I'm not trying to contradict what Ivan said, but I tend to agree with Mpume, right? I think I was part of Skatik's initial investment. That's a good story, right? But I'm sorry to say there are lots of bad stories too, right? So in our way to improve, the important thing is to concentrate on the bad stories and make sure that we brand South Africa correctly. And I'm not disrespecting Norwegian investment in South Africa, but it is pretty minuscule as compared to the overall FDI investment. So we got to look at it from a much more bigger point of view than just one good example of Skatik, which I personally was involved in when it started, because South Africa ran one of the best renewable programs in the world, which has been copied by a number of countries. So you could see from that demonstration that we can do well, right? You know, when we want to. But there are also lots of issues of branding, which are very, very important, because what happens with investment is that it raises the cost of equity straight away. If there are bottlenecks, if there are issues which are, I mean, a simple example, I know no South African likes the Department of Home Affairs, right? Okay, for example, it's simple example, I do a foreign direct investment. It's currently the waiting period in South Africa to get a simple work permit is more than 7 months, right? So I'm just giving you examples of bottlenecks, whether they are corruption oriented or non-corruption oriented. It's a branding issue of what we're trying to project. What Minister Honeycomb tries really hard to project as a brand ambassador, the president does, and very well meaning, but down the line, we are lost in translation, in my view. So, so I think it's really important to concentrate on how we can improve. Yes, there are good examples like Skatik, etc., but there are also lots of bad examples.
Well, I think that, thank you, Deepak. In the meantime, you might want to check the question and answer part. I think Anisha has come back to you in terms of your ongoing communication. I'm going to now go to Derek. Derek, the last time you were with us, you actually invited the ambassador and others and say, come to me, come to us, come tell us these things, okay? So, and I'm sure people have been telling you and you are getting compliments on the ground, but you are only one guy, you know, and maybe there's only a few of you, you know, as presidential envoys. So, you know, I don't think it's going to be sustainable to always come to you, but I think until something bigger happens, I think people will continue coming back to you. But how do we do better? How do we use these understated assets? Because for me, this is like a rough, kind of a diamond in the rough. It's kind of an opportunity. It's huge potential. And we know South Africa has got amazing potential in all kind of respects. I always refer to the World Cup. Yes, it might be a long time ago now, the Football World Cup in 2010, but we were told it's the second biggest, most successful World Cup after the US in the world, right? We can do these things. We can do these fast trains. We can do all these things when we decide and when the whip is behind us. How can we do better, Derek? What recommendations do you have?
Thanks, Mthunzi. I mean, yeah, so we are honored with this title of investment envoys, if you like, but there are, you know, and there are a handful of us, but there are many other people, including yourself, who can engage with potential investors, including Mpume, and who can tell the story and deal with some of the questions investors may have. So it doesn't depend entirely on us. But since you've raised this, you know, I am in the large sort of army of unemployed people in South Africa. Well, I'm retired, not unemployed, the big difference. So, and a lot more available than I was when I was in cabinet and in parliament, etc. So just a suggestion to Sana is that
Hello, did we lose Derek or did you guys lose me? Can you hear me?
We lost Derek.
We lost Derek. Okay, because we lost him when he said he's got a suggestion for Sana. So he's got to bring back that suggestion when he comes back. I think in the meantime, then let's move to somebody else and maybe focus on other parts. I mean, Deepak, something you said earlier on also resonated with me. You said, although you don't want to repeat a lot of the things that were said by Derek and by other people, you said, but you want to mention that there's a direct correlation between GDP and corruption. Those were your words. Direct correlation between GDP and corruption. Then you proceeded to talk about perceived corruption a lot. Can you come back to this direct correlation between GDP and corruption? I think for me, that's also important for people to unpack and understand. Over to you, Deepak.
Yeah, thank you. I can only quote from all the literature there is. So if you read through research done by different business schools across the world, Transparency International, corruption indices, all of them have correlated that where corruption, whether real or perceived, is high, GDP is low, right? Where growth rates are stymied or have come to a standstill, corruption is high, right? And it is it's just statistically been proved everywhere that that is a fact. And I think the problem is that when you get a country like South Africa with a very high disparity of income, right? That means we have very rich people and we have very poor people, right? The impact on corruption is felt more on poor people than there is on rich people, which pulls them down even further, right, at the end of the day. Because they're the ones who benefit the most from foreign direct investment, right? At the end of the day, they benefit by way of jobs, by ability to earn a living, and that gets tremendously impacted. So that is a statistical correlation which is available, everywhere, whatever research you read on. And I think, like I said, then on top of that, we had COVID here. So, and our perceptions of corruption, etc., get further amplified, which has a further impact on growth rates and poverty alleviation. So I'll stop there, Prof, but that is really what I wanted to say. I have statistics available. I have graphs and other things on research on this subject, but the time is too short to present all that to this webinar.
Thank you. And switching gears just a little bit, because earlier on, Ivan talked about ESGs, and just for our participants and the people who are listening, I'm quite certain Ivan was referring to environmental, social, and governance issues. But at the same time, the ambassador, before she left, talked about human rights, South Africa being part of the Human Rights Council, which again is a very important thing that South Africa is a member of the Human Rights Council. So we also have the Sustainable Development Goals. People know about the Sustainable Development Goals, there's 17 of them. And of course, number 1 is poverty. Number 2 is zero hunger. Number 8 is economic activity and decent work, okay? There's other important ones. Then there's the environment as well, from 11, 12, 13, thereabouts. Now, what intrigued me yesterday was that when I was facilitating the United Nations Guiding Principles for Human Rights and Responsible Business Conduct, it was a workshop for Africa because all the regions have had the workshops. We've been doing these, and everybody zoned in on the devastation of COVID. So on the face of it, you think, okay, why are we talking about health issues? And then, then we start talking about the issue of the poor people, same as Deepak has done. I think there was somebody else amongst us, I think it was Derek as well, talking about the impact it has on poor people, the impact it has on the vulnerable. Now, the biggest issue right now in Africa, and I'm told in Latin America, is the devastation of the COVID, and it's been equated as a human rights violation in terms of the failure by governments to act, the failure for them to do what is their duty, because in terms of the United Nations Guiding Principles, it is the state's duty to act. The state must act. The state might make things better. Now, all these things are interconnected. And more often than not, it also came up yesterday, the reason things are not happening is because of corruption, because we're not getting to the poor people. We're not getting to the vulnerable. So even in South Africa, we can talk about South Africa having two economies. One economy, maybe about 25 to 30% is made up of a highly industrialized part of South Africa, the stock exchange that Norway invests in. But the balance of it is informality. It's parts of SMMEs and all that kind of informality where people are not registered, services don't get to them. And so how do we ensure, because for me, it comes from this direct correlation of GDP and corruption, but also direct correlation between poverty and corruption and it getting worse. And what kind of comment can you give on how can we move from that point so that our partnerships with the rest of the world, with Norway specifically right now, we can be able to embark on projects that take us to a higher level? How can we do that? And for you, I'm coming to you now, Ivan, I'm preparing you, so I hope you'll be ready. Derek, I'm noting you are back with us and I'll come back to you just now. We got cut when you were saying you've got some suggestions for Sana and then we got cut off. And I want those suggestions for Sana. But Ivan, can you comment on what I've said if you can?
Well, it's a good question, good topic. I guess I tend to be more practical in the sense that we need to have some tangible projects and take it from there. I mean, it's at least from my perspective, a bit harder to comment on the kind of the wider issues on the pandemic and how that has been handled by the governments and how then corruption comes into that. But I just, one thing that struck me when countries started to close down, it was President Patrice Talon in Benin who said, you know, this is a privilege that certain countries can do. We are in no place to close down. I mean, there are people that needs to go to work every day to survive. I don't really know how to comment on the big issue then, Professor, but I would also like to, if time allows us later on, I mean, would like to ask also Deepak, because you have been around negotiation tables and been into so many transactions. How have you seen this corruption real life? Because maybe it's because I haven't been in those transaction meetings, but still it's so disconnected from what we hear. So that would be interesting, you know, and how have you then solved those kind of practical issues? Because one of the great things about South Africa is the transparency. I mean, is there then a kind of a hotline you can call and kind of report this issue? Or so if time allows us later on, it would be super interesting to get some of those practical examples and how you've dealt with it, because that would be super interesting.
I will try and get us back to that, Ivan, but you've said this twice now, the power of examples. And you talked about the amazing journey traveled by one of the companies that you mentioned, and now talking about pragmatic, tangible projects. And on this point, of course, I'm going to go to Derek now to talk about the suggestions for Sana, but I want my CEO, Sanjay, to be listening now and be on standby, because, you know, Sanjay, by the way, is South African. He fell in love, of course, with many things in Norway, including his wife, and then he's never come back. But I think Sanjay, when Ivan talks about pragmatic, tangible projects, I think given our MOU, Sana and NABA needs to now find these projects. Mpume talked about the Chamber of Commerce in Durban doing certain things. She then said there's a lot of Chamber of Commerce offices throughout the country. She also said she thinks Sana could be a platform. I heard Mpume say that. So we park that for Sanjay. Sanjay is listening. Over to you, Derek. You had suggestions for Sana.
Thanks very much, Mthunzi. Before I get to that, I just want to touch on some of the issues raised. I think the ambassador was excellent in listing some of these understated assets, because it's sometimes something that we take for granted. I mean, each one of them we know about, but it almost takes putting them all together and saying it's this, it's that, and the other thing. And it altogether creates a picture of South Africa, of a South Africa that we can actually be proud of. And it sort of puts certain of our challenges into perspective, if you like. And so I think that was extremely useful. Prof, you spoke about the Rugby World Cup and that we're the World Cup champions of the world, the rugby champions of the world. But maybe more important to highlight showcase some of our achievements would be the Square Kilometer Array, which is a very large radio telescope. Now, this radio telescope, upon completion, will be 50 times more powerful than any other telescope that exists in the world. 50 times more powerful than any other telescope. Yet it was designed by conceptualized by South African astronomers. Mpuma, you spoke about our excellent researchers. We've got good researchers, good scientists, good engineers for that matter. It was designed by South Africans, built by South Africans, and upon completion, it will be, by a long way, the most powerful radio telescope in the world. Now, a lot of investors won't be interested in radio telescopes and astronomy, but the fact that we have the capacity to do these things with 8 African partner countries speaks a lot about what we are capable of. On the branding, I largely agree with Mpuma, and I think we need, and with yourself, Chair, that we do need to brand our country better. We need to highlight some of these, what we call understated assets, but we do need to have a review. A lot of our challenges lie in what the development plan, national development plan, talks about the capacity of the state and building a capable state. So a lot of what we fail to do is because of our own limitations and weaknesses as government, if you like. So one thing that we should do is to do a good overview, Mpuma, of brand SA, of proudly South African, of SA tourism, because we can't afford to have a range of institutions branding South Africa in different ways in different parts of the world. It costs a lot of money, and there's a question about it, whether it is being effectively done. I think the appointment of ambassadors is critically important, and it's a lesson to us politically. We shouldn't appoint Mpuma to be an ambassador because she failed in business and she was kicked off the legislature, and she was a councillor in her locality, and she was involved in things that she shouldn't have been involved in. Let's make her ambassador. That's not the way it should work. So we've got some excellent ambassadors and some ambassadors that probably shouldn't be there, but ambassadors are there to promote your country and brand your country as well. Finally, I also want to agree with, before I get onto the couple of suggestions, I agree with Deepak that, we can go to investment conferences and we can talk about, all of these good things that we're doing, and the question will come back to us, but what are you doing about this? What are you doing about corruption? So it's clear, and that's the good news, I suppose, is that, as the ambassador said, institutions are being strengthened now. Institutions are acting. It took a while. It's easy to destroy institutions. It takes a long time to rebuild. And then the wheels of justice do turn slowly. The ambassador gave it good reason to say, well, actually, there isn't a quick fix because we do have a constitution, and that's important to investors as well. In doing business in South Africa, to say that there are court processes, judicial processes that are done thoroughly with rights guaranteed to citizens, to anyone living in South Africa for that matter. But they will come back and say, what are you doing about corruption? I think we have an answer now, which we would not have had a year ago. So even less than a year ago, people said, yeah, well, fine, we've got the Zondo Commission, we've got a newly appointed Director of Public Prosecutions, but nothing is happening. Well, nothing was happening because it takes time. And the Director of Public Prosecutions correctly was determined to not take matters to court that are not court ready. But now people are being prosecuted because the question arose, but you're just prosecuting the small fry, you're not dealing with the high profile individuals. But just over a month ago, the Secretary General of the ANC himself was arrested and prosecuted. So it just addresses this issue about we're a country that is afraid to take action against politicians or well-connected individuals. We aren't. We have an independent constitution. We have a Zondo inquiry that is challenging ministers, will even challenge the president if necessary. And I think that's all good news. But that is the question that we need to be able to address, not whether there's corruption or not, but how we are dealing with corruption. On my proposal to it's a simple one, to Sana. And these discussions are very useful, extremely useful. But at the end of the day, investors, potential investors from Norway, albeit even if Norway isn't the biggest investing country in South Africa, every country that has the potential to invest and does invest is important to us. So insofar as there are investors in Norway who have particular questions and would like to have an engagement that you can't really have on this kind of platform, put them in direct contact with us. Facilitate a 1-hour session because it's easy. You don't have to travel all the way to South Africa. We don't have to travel to Norway. We can have a 1-hour session and they can ask some of their questions, some of which we hopefully will be able to answer. And as I was saying, it's not only myself and the group of investment envoys. You can put, if you can't get hold of us, and Puma is well able to answer these questions. You, Prof, are well able to answer these questions. But at the end of the day, let's think a bit differently and engage more directly with potential investors. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. You've hit the nail on the head. I think speaking for myself, before the COVID, I was traveling about 30 countries a year, Derek. I try and do my best in selling my country. There's just one problem I have about the people in my country. They're not very welcoming to South Africans who may seemingly know a little bit more than them. That's a discussion for a different day. We have this problem with respect for other South Africans. We respect other people who are imported a little bit more. And this for me is a problem because you find that you end up coming against egos when you offer yourself and people think you want to take over their roles. And all you're saying is, I just want to help. Just give me a little bit to help. So we'll come back to that. But I liked your example of the square kilometer array. One of them is because of a selfish interest, which I have to mention now, is that, the university that is doing the most work with the square kilometer array is a little known university of the Western Cape. The University of the Western Cape, which is the number 8 university in the African continent, is the number 1 astrophysics university in the African continent because of the square kilometer array, partnered with the square kilometer array. Of course, there's 2 other universities that work with UWC. I won't mention their name very deliberately. So UWC is the one because I'm a professor of law there, right? But the second element that for me, the square kilometer array is important is because we beat this country that we love beating in rugby and in cricket called Australia. For building it and setting it up. So it's always a very nice memory for me whenever I think about it. But I think these are the understated assets we need to talk about a little bit more. These are the understated assets we need to do something about. And I think Sana and Naba are now going to be picking up on these positive aspects of how to work with this, find a project, do things together in education, in other areas to be able to do that. But I want to go back before we close to Deepak, because Ivan asked Deepak that if there's more time, and I'm giving more time because we have it and we've been very good and productive with our time, can you maybe share a little bit of your practical experiences, as Ivan put it, in the deal-making process, in terms of how things could be done better, how things could be done differently so that we can get more. I hope I did justice to your question, Ivan. Over to Deepak.
Okay, thank you. I think I just got to be careful here because, when you speak of live or examples, I don't want to be kind of sued by people. But to be honest, I worked for 33 years in investments across the continent. Other than bureaucracy, I have not come across one case where I've been asked to pay a bribe in order to facilitate a transaction. It's always been perceived, right? And there have been bottlenecks, or like for instance, we had a transfer of an asset to us. It took us 4 years in one country to do a simple transfer in shares, right? And we refused to pay any facilitation fee. and said, we don't do this. And if it can't be done, we will withdraw our investment. So when we started threatening withdrawal of our investment, etc., and people saw that we are unable to facilitate fees on a large transaction like that. It was a transaction worth $200 million US. In the end, they did the transfer after 4 years. Right? Okay, so that was the time period. It is frustrating, and that's what stops foreign direct investment, in my view, right? At the end of the day. So those are the areas. But I've had one case where I was actually fired from the company because of it, because of raising it. It related to the late president of Zambia, President Chiluba. I was part of the first privatization of the mining industry there, and I worked there. And I objected to a sale of a mine to cobalt traders out of New York who were going to ruin the mines and strip it to its bare. And I objected to it. I was fired the next day. So, but he was indicted later for corruption himself. Right? He passed away subsequently. So that's my direct experience with corruption, which I faced as an individual working for an organization. But other than bureaucracy and bottlenecks, etc., and unable to process things over a period of time, because of the nature of organization I work for, which was the Norwegians, for over 20 years, they also knew that they were the wrong people to ask for a bribe. So, so I think that becomes really important. If you portray that image and that those models to people, it takes two hands to clap and it takes two hands to corrupt, right? That's what I always believe in. So we never talk about the people who facilitate the corruption by giving the bribe, right? We always talk about the recipients, right? And I would really hope that, punishment and prosecutions are dealt with fairly, especially with big businesses, in my view, right? And a lot of businesses have good moral ethics, and they sometimes don't know where the line is, right? It could just be facilitation fees. A lot of big businesses in the world pay fines for doing the wrong thing. It's part of their doing business costs, right? And so I think that's a problem which is far more universal than this forum. But that's my view, my personal view, right?
Thank you, Deepak. I'm going to come to you, Mpume, for sort of your last remarks just now. But I think, thank you for that, Deepak. I think also last time we talked about the bureaucracy. Bureaucracy has come up again in terms of access to power. It was actually the ambassador who said one of the challenges in South Africa is access to power, being difficult to find the decision makers. It's complicated to do that. Of course, Derek kindly offered that we keep contacting him and others. So I'm piling the list now. There's a lot of things Derek now is going to do in his retirement. I think he maybe have to come back out of retirement because he also now will be meeting with a lot of business people that want to come and do business in South Africa. Sana and Naba were listening. So everything we have, we just push it to Derek, guys. You've heard that for sure, right? That's what we do from now. They say, you don't know how to do it, you give it to Derek. It's like in Orlando Pirates, there used to be a guy called Bashin Mahlangu. They used to say, you don't know what to do with the ball, give it to Bashin. Bashin will know what to do with the ball. So there it is. The ball will always go to Derek. But I think in the meantime, in the spirit of positivity, I think it's very important also that all of us have a role. I think all of you have said we all have a role to play. And of course, everything is slow. Wheels of justice are slow. One of my professors in law used to say the law is an ass. It's a real donkey. Takes its time to do anything, whilst you're waiting for it. But I think one of the things I've realized, and as I'm getting older in life, I realize that, if we focus and we use our collective numbers as teams and we do the right thing, things happen one step at a time, one person at a time. We mustn't be too greedy to want to see things happen overnight. As long as we see positivity, as long as we see movement. So when we see movement, let's make sure that we can add I think to the constructive movement there is. I think, Ivan, you also mentioned something very important. The president of Benin, I think, was right. You know, I would have said to him, d'accord, Monsieur le Président, it's correct, because, you know, some countries can't close. You can't afford. It's a privilege you can't have when you've got COVID. You know, the economy's got to be working every day. So now, colleagues, I'm going to ask for your remarks, your 1-minute remarks, so that we can close. There's a few announcements I have to make. I note that there is a note on our question and answers from Jithan Maharaj, who is an advisor to SANA. By the way, Mpume is also an advisor to SANA. And Jithan says, the mandatory implementation of projects is fundamental to creating key change within economies. As advisor to SANA, I have spoken to the CEO, that will be Sanjay, at length regarding identification and management of such projects, including improving capacitation geared towards good governance at municipal level. Time is no longer on the side of those wanting to experience the positive impact of change within the South African socio-economic environment, and assistance has now become a matter of urgency. So as our advisor, we've noted that, Jithan, and we will be working on it. So now, one by one, remarks from you, colleagues, starting with you, Mpume. Are you there, Mpume?
Thanks, Mtunzi, for that. I think for me, the first thing, yes, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Can you hear me? Good, wonderful, thank you. I think for me, we've heard different views being shared. The one call out for me I would like to raise is business has the power. It takes power to corrupt, we know that part, but in this case, business has more power than government. And we need to use a collective voice as business to challenge what is happening, what we see as being wrong. I find that as business, we go in as individuals, but have we tried going as a collective? Because for us to challenge how things are working currently, we need to use real examples, bring evidence forward for investigation, and then take that further. But where there's success in economies, Germany is a good example of that, where the family-run businesses run the economy almost, and they've got a bigger voice. How do we start working, using that power behind us to use business to then turn the wheels around and start cleaning up? Because when money says, I want to see this happening, there is no other way to really act but to oblige. Because without the money to run the country, you cannot have a country to run going forward. So I'm calling on business to be a bit more organized and do things differently going forward. That's my closing remark, Mtunzi. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mpume. As our advisor, we shall be calling on you with Sanjay and also calling in partnership with Ivan and a lot of our other colleagues. There was actually, I'll come back later to something a colleague also mentioned from Norway, which I forgot to raise, but I'll raise it later. In the meantime, Ivan, you can make your concluding remark.
Well, let me just again compliment Sana for bringing up a sensitive topic. You know, it's really commendable, and in the spirit of this, let's pull our forces together. I mean, there's a collective of great resources here, and when the situation allows for it, let's be ready and find concrete projects that we can do together. I think that would be my short statement. And again, compliments to everyone here for bringing great reflections to the table.
Thank you, Ivan. So I've found the statement that was made by one of my colleagues on LinkedIn, Professor Joseph Knoll. Professor Joseph Knoll is a professor at the University of Oslo. And one of the things he said on LinkedIn, he said, needless to mention, Mtunzi, that digital economies have probably the largest impact on corruption, as the e-visa implementations have shown. Next step is to ensure that every single person has access to financial services in the digital world. We will deal with that in the future, not today, but I thought, let me just plant that with you. It was a comment that was made on LinkedIn, as I've said. So moving over to you now, Deepak, for your concluding remark, and then I'll be coming to you, Derek.
I'm not going to summarize anything. All I'll just really add is that last time around, we raised the issue of accessibility. And I would really implore all the people in power and all the people with authority and influence to allow accessibility, which is quite unique in South Africa, which is very, very difficult. Out of all the countries in the continent, it's the least accessible country to people who you can get information or decision making for, or you want to do new investments or etc. There is no like one-stop shop. There are different agencies, as Minister Honeycomb said, and I think it'll be really, really useful. I find it exceedingly difficult to access anyone in this country, and accessing doesn't mean that there is corruption involved. Accessing is trying to see how best you can do a particular transaction or facilitate investment, right? It is extremely difficult in this country to do that. I think even a small, a lower official is more important than the Queen of England in this country sometimes, right? So I think it's really, really important that we try and break those barriers. I don't know how, but that's my take on this matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Deepak. Now to you, Derek.
Thanks, Mthunzi. I share the view that this has been a very useful session. I think you've got some excellent advisors and good people working at SANA, and I think that's very encouraging. And of course, a great ambassador, and that's a wonderful thing for us. Mpume's comment on business has the power. I agree with her. In fact, Mpume, business has a lot more power now than it would have before, because I think there's a more business-friendly environment. I do think one of the challenges for business, though, is to continuously improve its image, do more on its own accord to address socioeconomic challenges and to reach out to communities, and so that businesses are taken more seriously, and businesses, we've got to address this paradigm, if you like, and of radical economic transformation and businesses. You Mpume, you're probably just an agent of white monopoly capital. We've got to address that discourse, but change the image of business. You as agent of white monopoly capital. So I think business does have the power, but business must use that power very constructively and lead in many ways by example. On the corruptor and corruptee, Deepak, I mean, I sort of partly agree, but I think if you look at the arms deal that will be coming up soon, it's both the company that paid the bribe and those that received the bribes. Of course, those that receive the bribes are also corrupt. It's not like the people paying the bribe are corrupt. They're both corrupt, and they both fall under the same legislation and are to be found guilty of corruption. But in general, I think just to conclude on corruption, I think it is a collective effort that we need, and an ethos that we need. Encourage whistleblowing. We need trade unions to be involved, because they are there in the companies raising all sorts of issues. They should be giving support to whistleblowers. In your own companies, Mpume and others who are in business, encourage whistleblowers to come forward in your companies, but it goes far beyond companies. I think our big challenge is the capability of the state and corruption within government. And I think the good news, I think, is that we are acutely aware of it and that we are doing our utmost to combat it. And I do think we're going to win this war. Thanks, Chairperson.
Thank you very much, Derek. I think we'll all agree it's been a phenomenal conversation. I think it's the kind of conversations qualitatively we should have in this country, particularly for me, the parts on solution orientedness, because it's easy to criticize. It's very easy to be armchair critics. It's very easy to point fingers at people. But as I always say to colleagues of mine internationally, whenever you point a finger in our African culture, my grandfather used to say, look at the fingers that are pointing at you. So you got to be careful. We all have a role to play. We all have to be agents of change. But at the same time, even when we do say business is powerful and business must do its role, the one thing we must be very careful not to inadvertently shift away is the duty by the state to protect. the state must always protect. It cannot abdicate that role to anybody else, to social partners, okay? But social partners, including business, also have the duty to respect and to remedy. This is what the United Nations Guiding Principles are about, by the way, in human rights, which is, you know, the other world that I work in a lot. So those for me are important components, because in relation to business as well, the enabling environment has to be by government. Government must enable, must give us the right kind of rules to play. Government must be accessible to us, okay? So in many ways, I love it when I go to some countries. I'm not saying we can all be like, you know, we're all different, of course. And for me, I want us to be different. As Africans, we must always be different and be proud in our differences, who we are, as diverse as we are. But sometimes I love it if I go to Sweden and I meet the Prime Minister of Sweden on a bus, and I bump into him on a bus, and we're on the bus together. It's no big deal. It's not like it must be, no, even if we're on the same aeroplane, I can't have access to my president because there's like 20 security guards blocking him, you know, so I don't get to him. I mean, that for me is messed up. Those are the kind of things we need to change. Accessibility, I think, starts with little things like that, that when you become our minister, you serve us. We are there for you to serve us, not the other way around. Not that when you come around, we must bend and never look up because you are so powerful. That is one of the problems, I think, with society, is that we also create this huge power. And we do that ourselves. We participate, by the way, as citizens. We don't tell our ministers and say, sorry, minister, yes, you're an honorable minister. Yes, you're my leader. But my leader, when you are wrong, you're wrong. When you off, you off. I have a few ministers, of course, for me who don't speak to me, because I do tend to do that. I will not mention their names. And I said, I'm sorry, minister, with respect, you are now confused and lost. I'm happy to help you if you'll allow me. But if you don't allow me, of course, I can't help you, you know? So these are the things I think we also need to work on as a people, especially a people who have the resources and who have the access. Those of us who have the access must use that access, must leverage the access to improve access for those who don't. Because my mother, who's in the rural villages, is never going to have access. It's not possible for the community I come from to have access. It should be. In an ideal world, they should. In an ideal world, they should also be paid a visit once in a year by the president. But reality is the president is too busy dealing with too many fires right now. He's never going to make it to my little village. Not this year, maybe not even next year. So those of us who have the access must use it. And I think for me, that is very, very important. As SANA and NABA will do what we can to be able to assist. We've got lots of friends in many places around the world. And what I think I pick up about South Africa, and I tell my colleagues all the time, you know, I was talking to the CEO of Business Unity South Africa the other day. I said to him, you know, the phenomenal thing about South Africa is that even when South Africa is misfiring, and we've been misfiring for a long time, there is this very high expectation that South Africa must lead. South Africa must, you know, it's still there. People still want us to lead. People still want us to do things. Of course, that is not to be confused with arrogance. It doesn't mean we must be arrogant and not want to, you know, consider the other people and work with them and be team members and be team players. But the reality is South Africa is expected to lead, and South Africa can lead. And South Africa can only lead if it accepts this responsibility and does something about it. It has to do something about it. We seem to be like starstruck, you know, like a rabbit caught in between lights that we don't know what to do. And it's there for us to do. So I think for me, we need to continue. And on that note, Bume mentioned Germany, I think, in terms of family-run companies. The other thing I want to mention about Germany that for me, if we were to emulate this, of course, customized to our conditions, customized for our purposes, is the two-tiered education of the German system. You know, the way that the status of the academic part of their education is given the same status level as the vocational one. You know, the fact that as you enter both, and both have the same level of appreciation and respect. And you can come out at any time and go into the other as you please when you want to, but the whole focus is employment. The whole focus is employment creation. Not that I've gone to university, but I'm unemployed and sitting at home. This is rubbish. This is nonsense. These are the kind of things we need to be doing and educating our people. And so for me, that will be a very important discussion that we'll have on the 5th of February. Sanjay has already got this discussion on our education education program, and it reads the important role universities can play and all of us can play in improving the lives of people. The specificity, of course, of this particular discussion is gender equality and gender-based violence. As a very proud father, I would like to invite all of you because my daughter will speak on gender-based violence. She's here next door in my house at the moment, but she's leaving in a few days' time, going back to the UK where she lives and does a master's in psychology. But the important thing is that she's an activist in gender-based violence. She's a published poet in the UK. She does Black Lives Matter and gender-based things, and she says things I could never say, but of course, she's a woman and she's young, so she can get away with a lot of things, you know? Personally, I could never get away with that stuff. Somebody would nail me and sort me out. On the 2nd of March, we have another webinar on energy, an energy webinar. I'm told that the former minister, Jeff Radebe, will be with us there, and we will be having our partners, NOWEP, the Norwegian energy partners. So as you can see, colleagues, SATNA is doing its best to create as much conversation as we can, to bridge gaps as much as we can. Okay, Ashraf has his hand up. I did not see that. Forgive me, we still have 5 minutes, so I was busy wrapping up. Where's Ashraf? So Amanda, are you able to connect us with Ashraf? Because I'm not sure how this works in terms of people outside the participants. I forgot now. So Amanda, can Ashraf simply come in or must he post his question? Over to you, Amanda.
I've allowed him to pose his question.
It's already posed.
I've allowed him to speak to us.
Okay, okay. Open Ashraf up then to speak. Ashraf Gadar, by the way, is a very good friend of mine, and he leads a very amazing group here called Champion South Africa, and he's working out on how all of us can be champions, how all of us, as if we need a champion nation, we need champion people. So Ashraf, over to you. Ashraf?
Somehow he's not coming through.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Can hear you now, Ashraf. Ashraf, we can hear you now. You speak.
Okay, thanks. This is rather very off the cuff. I mean, I didn't even realize my hand was raised because I simply posed the question. But read it as it may, you know, maybe that point about the question is important, which is, I mean, first of all, it's been a super session and I followed it right through. I should tell you that, right? But, you know, we know about this relationship between, you know, government and business, and then politicians and individuals. I mean, 2 points coming out of it. There is a sense, and I hear this increasingly, not just in our country, South Africa, but around the world, that if you are not able to short circuit business with government, you in fact are out of business. So that's just 1 point. What then is the way to work around that? But the more important one, you know, what is the vaccine for corruption? If corruption is a pandemic and even has destroyed nations, and I think the point that Deepak Malik made was so interesting about the relationship between corruption and lower GDP. I think it's a very important reference. So if corruption has destroyed countries and destroyed economies, and if it's that important that it undermines society, then what is the vaccine, to borrow a very topical phrase, for corruption?
Thank you, Ashraf. Of course, Ashraf is being very symbolic in his language and very colorful and using the times of pandemic to talk about vaccines. So now he's looking for a vaccine for corruption, which I think is very clever, very smart way of putting it. We have, of course, 3 minutes. So if any of you want to talk about the vaccine now of corruption, we could also have a topic, Sanjay, next time about what is the vaccine of corruption as we go forward. But I'm happy for my panelists to speak for 30 seconds, no more, 30 seconds. Anyone who's moved by the spirit on vaccine of corruption. Doesn't seem to move anybody. I don't think anybody wants to be a health practitioner for corruption. Mpume?
Yeah, I'm gonna say it and you can shoot me afterwards. I think we've become cowards as a nation. Honestly, we have, and we've lost our voice, our courage to stand up against the wrong. And because of that, so much wrong is happening. They say bad always prosper when good men keep quiet. We need to raise our voices.
So, Kumi, you would no doubt have been delighted when the acting Director General spoke as he did at the Zondo Commission. But of concern is the fact that the minister tried to stifle him. But the fact is that he's an example of exactly what you say. We must be brave and we must not be cowards. Thank you.
Thank you, Derek. Deepak, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I actually answered on the chat, but maybe it didn't go through because what I said to Ashraf was a little bit tongue-in-cheek. I said, maybe the first thing we can do is to use our vote wisely, right? We elect honest people, right? And we punish people quickly. Maybe the efficacy of that vaccine may not be as high as 80 or 90%, but even if it's 5 or 10%, we are making headway. So.
Absolutely. One step at a time and one person at a time. I really think for me, Mpume, you've hit the nail on the, I can't remember the English now. You hit something on the head, the nail on the head. You know, I think some of us, when we spoke out, we used to get hit so hard on the head. You know, you look behind you with all your colleagues that said you must raise an issue. And especially when a minister is in the room, there's a minister who still today is finding it hard to speak to me 10 years later because I went on for him because everybody said, you got to tell him he's out of line and you are our vice president. Tell him. Oh my God, I went and I hit him. And then somewhere along the line, all my colleagues were saying, oh, thank you, Honorable Minister, for visiting us. We know how busy you are. Your time is precious. Not one of them backed me up. I was left alone in that. But I think that is the point, Pume, that we've become cowards. And the issue is, as other people will say, you know, truth has become the new fake news. You know, when you speak truth, there's a very big problem. But one thing I have on my email for the last 12, 13 years is that bravery is not the absence of fear, but the presence of courage in the face of fear. I think for me, that's absolutely, absolutely important. These are the things we need to do. It is exactly 1,300 hours, which would make it 1,200 hours in Norway. So I'm ending this conversation, colleagues. It's been excellent. And I think we look forward to your participation again in the future. Goodbye. Thank you. Thank you, Sana. Thank you, all our colleagues. Thank you, Naba. Thank you, colleagues. We'll see you next time. Goodbye.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye. Bye. Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you, Wesgro.